this. Is there anybody who would like to be heard on any issue of burn? Okay. All right. 5th, 2025 workshop meeting minutes. Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify presentation by our friends at Gannon Fleming. Sounds exciting, but yeah. I'm sure.
I'm going to do a quick introduction. I'm Ben Briston, Gannon Shambai. I believe folks might know him already. And then our biosolids management plan, this 15-minute presentation of 2023. So I guess bear with us, but that I just showed you all. And then I'll get into comparing those. First, our current biosolids assisted wastewater treatment plant. It has been a low-cost program at best, and hauled annually. So that's the current process. Sludge is sent. Issues that are at the sludge holding tank. That liquid. And again, there's this slide here. Operational difficulties, which I touched on, premature equipment failure, clogging problem. There has been a negative public perception undertaken. The main objective, we wanted to make sure it's energy efficient. What goes into it to diversify the outlet from any risks. We want to acknowledge those and understand. Looked at the regional landscape. So as part of our report, meet regulatory constraints. Process. I delivered in April of 2020. In addition to that, we provided a technical. And finally, we developed our preliminary alternatives. For alternatives were investigated with this final report. That the 4 different alternatives that we looked at, the report, the second alternative is autothermal. The third process is anaerobic digestion. It's the post-line treatment. And this is pretty much summarizes the approach. By the way, if there are any questions or, we can just, the post-line treatment, it's a simpler operation. It reuses the wastewater treatment plant. And nuisance odors, I think I've mentioned that a few times already in the press on the high hauling and disposal costs associated with it, for those pathogens to regrow with this process that I wanted to Thermair. This is their the technical details, but I did want to put in Central PA, Lower Allen, in pro, con, or opportunity challenge perspective, greater than 50% reduction than a challenge. It's super energy intensive, so there's high nuisance odors, and the dewatering for this process can be a limited use for cake. That final product's anaerobic digestion and thermogram for this process. However, patient perspective, we did have a few site visit taken to that plant back in August of 2023. Again, the site visit was taken for to see that process. City of Lebanon Authority, Dairy Township Municipal Authority. In addition, I'm basically a heat drying of that dewatered biosol cake volume that comes out. There are 2 types dryers, a direct of end products. For this process, opportunities and challenges. So an opportunity for anaerobic process. Again, there's a similar volume. It's anaerobic. It's all covered. Those tanks are covered. Presentation, like I said, it's a proven technology, and there is a higher capital cost associated with this process. It's a bit more complex to operate and maintain. And finally, the 4th alternative that we looked at is thermal drying and pyrolysis. So the pyrolysis process, that second bullet there, I think sums up. Pyrolysis is a process that heats in the absence of oxygen. So this technology is emerging across the pond in Europe, more so than here. And there are a few companies that we've coordinated with over the lifespan of this report, to be specific, Char Technologies and Pyreg, and ever evolving. So the pyrolysis process, it does reduce the end product by 90%. There is no digestion associated with this option, so there's no tankage, similar to the 80 AT. You have aerobic digester tanks with anaerobic. Third alternative, you have the biochar, which is the product that is produced, so that is able to be sold. That third bullet there, there's studies and data to date that does show that PFAS and related compounds changing. We had a conversation that seems to be changing week to week with new studies coming out. Potential to recover the energy produced. There's lower O&M costs. And like I mentioned on that last slide, there's a potential for PFAS destruction. From a challenge perspective, there's a higher capital cost. It's more complex to operate and maintain. And like I said, it's on the comparison of these alternatives. I think this slide provides some decent information here in a nice graph. So each of these, I want to point out the chart and kind of that shows the reduction in the volume, the output for each of these alternatives. Furthest to the left on that chart, if you can see it, second line there on that bar chart is alternative number 2, ATAD, and that's about a 45% decrease in that solids volume. And then, as you see, you just get less of a annual wet tonnage that we calculated, and finally the pyrolysis provides the least amount of annual wet ton. This slide should look familiar. This pretty much takes all of those pros and cons that I spoke about already and summarizes them in one slide. So I'm not going to get into each of. Did highlight a few to me that I might be getting ahead of myself, but a few that are almost non-starters or fatal flaws with some of these options. The fact that it's an emerging technology is also another kind of non-starter for that alternative 4. This table provides, and I looked back at that last presentation that most of you have reviewed. One of the changes here was on the alternative 4. I think that was a lot. We learned that there's a different type of dryer that's required, a belt dryer as opposed to a drum dryer. So those costs really escalated whenever we coordinated with the manufacturer there for that process. Costs associated with each of the 4 alternatives. I'll leave that up there for a second for you folks to digest. And finally, 20-year with that alternative 4 being the costliest, and alternative 1 being the least expensive. Again, that option 4, thousands since we last met with you folks. Okay, on to the selection of our preferred alternative. Point is important. Like I mentioned, we looked at economic, operational, and maintenance, and environmental consideration with thermal drying. Best meets the borough's needs with the least trade-offs. That first bullet point, it's a proven technology. For flexibility and redundancy, and this option provides that. The second bullet point there, it minimizes the odor potential at the plant as well as the off-site locations. And I mentioned already the significant reduction in volume of the Matique 2 on this one. It kind of ties back to the redundancy. If a piece of equipment such as that dryer is out of service, that reactor goes out, then there's not an option there to kind of figure out how to get rid of that. But I want to speak to pyrolysis can be added in the future should PFAS be regulated, and that technology, the first person to try out the new technology, kind of want to let others be that guinea pig, is how I've kind of thought about it.
Yeah, I have one. So in that option, one of the challenges you had that a larger footprint was required.
Yes.
So we have space available for that?
To the south.
The south of the existing sludge holding tanks to the west.
To the west.
And then should eventually the pyrolysis technology become available, would there be a space issue for incorporating that, or?
We've in the future, that would be something that for this alternative 3, we wouldn't do the design for the pyrolysis, but we'd make sure that we considered connecting.
Questions? Yeah, so with option 3, the digestion and thermal drying, with it being more complex in terms of like operation and maintenance, would there be enough to ensure they're up to speed on the new process essentially?
Yeah, we did touch on that in the report. We started having discussions on that this proposed process. I know one of the questions was to estimate kind of manpower requirements and kind of what goes in question or not. Yeah.
I've got a few questions. I guess what are the like flooding or are there any I guess are certain parts of it more resilient to that? I guess
Tankage. This anaerobic digestion, these would be tanks, and then we would also have 2 buildings. So from a flooding perspective, all that and the dewatering equipment and that would all be in the centrifuge, and that equipment would also be held
outside the floodplain, and these the digesters are going to be at a slightly higher elevation actually than the existing tank kits you have there.
So the digester can take food waste. I guess since we're kind of the borough's exploring maybe bringing waste hauling in-house, generate a lot of like cat litter and poop, and like I have a 2.5-year-old son at home. I guess like what other, if people were to be purchasing like compostable items, all that, and take it there instead of having to pay the dump to take it.
Nick, I don't want to put you on the hot seat here, but
that's one of the ways to do a digest. So it's usually a third party that has a tanker truck, 5,000, 3,000 gallon truck that's coming in. Now, individuals that like some of those examples, probably not so much, but mostly high organic materials, food waste is a good example. Other industry have lots of they pump out those grease interceptors, and it's like candy without history.
My last question is just, I guess, what is the potential for like plant operations, or could there be?
So gas digestion, so the anaerobic digester will produce gas or biogas, and then it's used, sometimes used for heating of different buildings at the site. There are opportunities for advanced use of that digester gas. It's cost prohibitive. It's not good to take that for that type of system, but the opportunities there in the future when it does become something that's up here, so we shouldn't have excess gas beyond that.
I had a question. I am the doc, so some of this is very familiar, but also new, in that I think that he worked at the wastewater treatment plant whenever they had originally introduced the technology in like 1982. Sorry. Is that it could potentially be added in the long term? I think that that's a really valuable tool that I would love to see in addition. And I agree that they use it in Europe, and like, how long have they been using it in Europe? Is it more than 10 years? It seems like the Silicon Valley wastewater treatment plant is using it too. So, like, just I'm also interested in knowing if the economics would change as, again, it becomes more apparent domestically, and it could be something that we could, again, look into adding in the future. The third option, which we are seriously considering, how long have they been using that, and like, how is it different from being like emergent?
Yeah, and it's probably, I think, probably 6 or 8 facilities in Central PA that have anaerobic digesters. I think they were designed to build in the 70s or maybe even earlier.
I could also add to that. There are any number of industrial manufacturing facilities that also use anaerobic digesters, so it is definitely a widely.
Had mentioned about like selling the Class A biosolids. I wanted to know like sort of like what sort of revenue that would generate.
Yeah, well, so in most cases we give away without incurring costs. So the first alternative, line post-line treatment. The second alternative being the related application. The other two alternatives, aerobic digestion and recycling and pyrolysis produce other types of material that on some points that some of the systems that have been sold in Europe and other places, they rather pay a market where, believe it or not, the biochar. Yeah, they're market lots of producing Class A biosolids. So even though it gives them a lot of flexibility, there's not the versus there's not competitive in theory, sell it and have folks take it home and put it on their gardens, etc. It's not really. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of having this market reward. This soil meant for landscapers, like the golf courses that take that as lines, fertilizer. So there are options that are kind of free market the other way of that picture.
Any other questions? Okay, I have questions. I wait for everybody else. Sorry, workers. So I spent a lot of time around sewage plant. My dad retired about 15 years ago, so in my youth, I'd spend time with him there. Fun times. That's what when I said this was exciting of the pellets. I mean, my understanding is that we don't have really good studies about PFAS and what effect anaerobic digestion may have on that.
Yeah, that's fair to say. I think we do see, whether it's in the water process or the wastewater process, you will see some reductions in
come down, that it's going to do the trick for us, right? Yeah, and so then in any kind of when the pellets are used for whatever they're used, if they're used a golf, we don't have a lot of good options right now at the moment. I get that, but I just think we all need to be aware and cognizant of that. Again, just correct me if I'm wrong. Just trying to make sure.
Future processes to specifically address those contaminants of concern. As well as in the interim, as Ben was showing on some of the slides, the volume reduction advantage of that significant volume reduction in the event you get to like fill or do something else with it. So, again, that kind of goes back to speaking to the react to changing regulations and standards and those kind of things.
Okay. And then jumping off of what Councilor Shiles was talking about, I think, I forget what the FPR stands for, food processing residuals, and that those could potentially be used in these anaerobic digesters, because I know there are issues that they're having in the air if it goes in the anaerobic digester where there's odor control.
If there is, that is a possibility, yes.
Okay.
The type of food waste would be introduced with that.
Too long before I was mayor, and about probably 18 years ago or so, Councilor Heineman and I had a meeting with the then borough manager and then public works, like you crazy people. So it's nice to kind of see this come full circle now, as I'm probably ending my last few years here as an elected official here in Carlisle. But Okay. Move on to Public Works. Follow.
It's mostly an update. So we wanted to just give you an update on this Bedford and East traffic calming project and about speeding. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. You've got two one-way corridors, both have 2 lanes in each direction. If it's a nice wide open roadway, no oncoming traffic, it's easy for them to pick up speed even unintentionally. And they produced a set of concept plans, which we shared about a year ago at the Eastside Neighbors meeting, and even looked at a mini roundabout at the intersection of East and Bedford. And the feedback that we got primarily was that the reverse angle parking, there was right away when you have a car at an angle. It does produce more spaces in theory, but if your areas for that part on the roundabout, and especially the parking protected bike lanes. So as a result of that, we looked at 3 different options for how to investing in different amounts with various outcomes. And so option 1, we were looking at striping only. So what this would mean is that all the improvements would just be lines painted on the road. Is pretty easy to implement. And then option 2 is what we call a quick design, and that's where we take things like flexible delineators and quick curb, items that are physical that can be is more of a permanent solution. We'd use actual concrete and macadam to implement those changes. So looking at option 1 with the striping only, as I mentioned, it's the cheapest. One isn't. And then the other advantage is that we were, if you may recall, we were part of a multi-municipal Safe Streets for All grant application, which we did receive. Lower Paxton Township is spearhead concept of putting in these kind of quick build improvements in place so that we can try different things without having to invest too heavily. I guess the major, we may not get the desired results as effectively because technically people could just drive over the line if they don't pay attention to it. Then for option 2, builds, it still is kind of a pilot. It just gives you a little more protection with these physical pieces that are put into the road. But now when we put something physical into the road, there are some operational need to buy additional pieces of equipment, not to mention figure out the staffing and how that would work to achieve those maintenance issues. And then option 3, the full design, it's obviously the most effective. It's the quote best. The other disadvantage of the full design right now, given that we have the SS4A grant, those funds would not be able to be used for this purpose, because the SS4A funds are for either a quick, we go move forward with option 1. It's the lowest level of financial commitment and allows us to see what works and what doesn't before investing in a more permanent solution. 3 options, and depending on which one it is, either way, for any of those 3 options, we would still work with Dalwood to produce that set of design plans that eventually could be put out to bid.
Maybe to do sort of a hybrid of 1 and 2, where maybe at critical points, using those what are they, flexible plastic bollards, like at the chicane and that sort of thing, where you really.
If we went with the striping only, then we could probably even use borough forces to bolt down some of those flexible delineators in certain spots. And if we went with the striping only plus, they would be eligible for the SS4A funding as well.
Right. Okay.
How much potentially would be able to be covered through those matching funds? I'm just kind of curious as to how that would ultimately impact the cost to the borough for either of those options.
Didn't have them memorized, but if we had for the striping only, when it's all said and done, it'd be about 60,000 in terms of our match for the 300,000.
Did you? Okay.
I really do have more
I guess
questions, but I'm
just in thinking about like we had or you had sort of put those SS4A money to like use some of those in this design, and then potentially, I mean, they seem to hold up pretty well and be somewhat reusable. Like, if we find that the quick deployment sort of bike lane later or something like that.
Yeah, that definitely would be an option. We'll see. I mean, we put them down for. We may even come up with some solution of filling those holes with crack seal or something like that. If we start doing this in more locations and we see that it's damaging the road, but then to make sure we don't wreck our plows, so we remove them. They're more seasonal. Remove them in the winter.
And then I guess I think there's a lot of conflict between drivers and cyclists, and it's just to sort of like make sure that people are protected at those kind of more vulnerable areas. So.
It wouldn't be overly difficult. We might even be able to use borough forces to implement those pieces, but it is possible, just being fair, that depending on what we would decide to do,
So just kind of, I guess, maybe out of curiosity, if the long-term goal is more permanent work along this route line option, because it would provide a better picture of what permanent, like a permanent solution or permanent work on this corridor would look like, to kind of get a feel, not only there's more permanent changes put in. I mean, I do appreciate that it's slightly more costly than the striping, but it's still significantly lower cost than doing the full design.
Yeah, I mean that is a possibility, but you just have to decide what level of investment. And I think if we wanted to do that, maybe that striping plus could be a place if there are strategic areas. But yes, your question is spot on, and that is, if we went with that option, it would be a little bit more.
The cost is, I mean, just because I know we jumped through those slides. The cost of striping only, the estimate's $295,000. The quick design's $380,000, so it's about $17,000. I'm concerned.
But then you have to take into consideration the additional maintenance work that will need to be done and equipment that will be needed for snow and street sweeping. Right. So,
yeah.
So for the costs in general, it's that we have these matching grants. So if we would say approve the striping only in a future, in theory.
Yeah, trying to recall what Dawood's estimate was on the design. I think it was less than a year. Really nice to have that agreement in place before we started expending money on this. So that's just something to consider also.
Yeah, I mean, I just appreciate how much time's already gone into it, and it breaks my heart that it's on a shelf somewhere. Anyway, I want the work to be actually used is what I'm saying. And so I do appreciate the expediting of it to ensure something happen as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also did want to I also did want to say that, like, while you had said that like nothing was going to be like physically in cars, in offering now a protected bike lane, which I think is a really great return on investment and helps alleviate some of the. So I do really, really like that, and this sort of like free physical barrier that we're getting with cars that are going to be parked there during all hours of the day.
I conceptualize can get like what the striping only is, right? It's just the line painting. The full design is basically like the whole shebang. We saw mock-ups like what are we putting down? Is it kind of like temporary speed bumps, as Councilor Shiles brought up, or is it like that and any number of other things? I guess I'm just kind of in my mind having difficulty conceptualizing.
Are basically a little rubberized platform that has a plastic pole with a reflective piece on it, and so that would be installed. I'll just drive over it, but it would know it if it hit it. So it's just a little bit more protective
And that would be going along the bike lane. Is that
with the quick design with the delineators? It would run alongside the bike lane. So between the bike lane and the park car width, how do we do street sweeping? To the curb. So at the staff level, we talked about what kind of equipment would we have. Life here, he was even trying to be such a team player. He said, "Well, I guess we could take them out each week we were cleaning." That's not an option. So years maybe in certain areas, but that is the drawback right now for us, or for your manager. A hurdle there. Cyclists are feeling safe between the parked car and the curb, or if we're seeing too much encroachment by parked cars to the curb, and that delineators may be needed.
And sorry, just to clarify again, with the striping option, I mean, conceptually, we're talking about that putting the parking protected bike lane along both corridors, and essentially.
What happens if we do the striping and the striping's not effective in changing behavior, and then we have to consider? I assume then we're considering that's greater than just doing a quick build to begin with. So if it's 85,000 more now, is it just 85,000 more if we need to implement the quick build after we've done?
Exact answer to that question, but
that's a good answer too, because that's one of the things I'm struggling with to understand, probably something I want to have a better understanding of.
For us to cover up some of that striping with some of the quick build elements, and again, that could be done with borough forces, so it wouldn't require between the quick build and the striping. I mean, there's obviously not a huge difference, but there is a difference. So I'd probably need to talk to Dawood a little bit more closely about what that difference is.
Cost is in that, because those are all things I'd like to factor in the decision, even at this stage, if possible.
People have used everything from like toilet plungers to to show like the lines of things. But I'm just thinking of even myself, and then I'll get out and then I'll move my car again. Anyway, but I'm also thinking of even temporary things that could also be celebratory, of having like there's something visual just for at least the initial portion, so it doesn't have to be something that's there all the time, but even like the winner of a race, understanding of like, oh, this is how far I can go, and this is where the line is, and I know when I'm, because if you don't have a curb, a parking stop that your tire hits when it's open, like that there could be visual reminders for cars so that they would be able to know their limit. I just think that thinking ahead, that when it happens, like if there's additional things that could be very temporary, but could also be, fun and celebratory, just to give that visual.
I was just going to say, I think like the flexi posts are nice, but like I was going to see if I could find it, but I've got pictures of like cars in Philadelphia that still parking halfway in the bike lane.
Philadelphians are crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are a little bit more,
right, Chief?
a little bit more courteous here, but
not kind to bicycle riders.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah, I think I do like those vulcanized rubber speed bumps, just because it's sort of like in Harrisburg, they're already trashed. They probably were put back like a year ago, and then they get run over again several times by a vehicle, and they're kind of ruined. So the rubber.
When I think Brendan asked about like timeline wise, when you said a year, is that conceptually like design taking a year, or like if we say this is on the agenda, idea that then like we would have design work done within a year, or like the project would ideally start in a year, or kind of like I guess I'm just kind of trying to flesh out like timeline, like not only when going on at the intersection at the top of North Hanover, and being mindful of that, and kind of how this would fit in with that timeline.
I'm very glad until Project 1 was complete. So the timing actually would work out pretty well. If design, and I was estimating design taking a year, but I'm thinking like if you were to care of and then they start, I'm just thinking it would take about a year until we had design documents that had been previously brought to council and shared, and we know that it's not going to be done before December of this year. And so again, the timing would probably work out pretty well in terms of going to construction. If we do if we start the design.
Anything else? All right, thanks, Jeff.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it. There is no new business. Steph, do we have any public comment, any hands raised? Right, good, okay. All right. Any public comment here in Borough Hall? Okay, I see none. Then we are adjourned. Thank you all.